generally speaking, GitOps is a new way of managing the assets that you want in Kubernetes, the way that I want to describe Kubernetes GitOps. I can't stop talking about how incredibly impactful the GitOps discipline is to Kubernetes organizations.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 265, the impact of Kubernetes and GitOps on the tech landscape. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, back in March, you, along with 12,000 of your closest friends, hung out at KubeCon in Paris. Was that a pretty good day?
And most of us survived.
Most of you survived. That's good to hear. Is it still pretty amazing to you that the whole Kubernetes ecosystem is still growing at a large clip?
I was actually surprised a bit. I thought that now it's AI kind of, it usually goes in waves. What is even more surprising to me is that US and Europe switched before and after COVID. KubeCon in US was the bigger one always, and Europe has been bigger one now for a couple of years, ever since COVID. That might be actually symptomatic that actually, Europe is a bit lagging always compared to US. So maybe while you're giving up on Kubernetes and going somewhere else, maybe Europe is still, oh, look at that thing, right? Kind of like, oh, cool, discovering it.
You're using the word symptomatic and COVID in the same sentence. Don't do that anymore. On today's show, we have John Dietz on from KubeFirst. John, how you doing?
Doing well today, thank you. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for coming on. KubeFirst. Victor had an idea of what this was. I'm going to see if I can repeat it. It's sort of like an incubator for Kubernetes things. How close off base am I on that?
It's not bad. It's not bad. Basically, what we're trying to do with KubeFirst is we're trying to establish a foundation for platform engineering so that everybody that is considering running their platform, their internal developer platform on Kubernetes, can start from a starting point using all of the, what we consider to be best of breed, free, open source, cloud native tools. We kind of read the surveys that come out from CNCF or from Red Hat. We see the tools that enterprises want to use. We see the tools that tiny, small to medium businesses want to use. And there's a lot of overlap. And while every platform won't be the same as you go from company to company, there's going to be a lot of overlap when you go from company to company. We're all sort of centralizing on GitOps and secrets management, and a way to get those secrets out of your secrets management tool. And infrastructure as code is very real, and you need a way to build and deliver applications to dev stage and prod. Our mission is that shouldn't take 6 months to build from scratch. It should take minutes. And that's what KubeFirst is trying to do, is establish that foundation for you. We do it in a neat way so that you get to own the GitOps repository that's powering your whole organization and all the tools that we install. And because of that architecture, you can basically decide which tools we've installed into your control plane and pull request them away if you don't like them, and add your favorite tools instead. And our hope is that turns a 6, 9, 12, 15-month operation into a couple days of getting rid of the one tool that we're using that you don't like and replacing it with the tool that you'd rather be using. So that's basically what we're doing with KubeFirst.
So let me ask maybe a softball question and maybe not. Okay, number one, first off, you're saying KubeFirst.
I'm saying cube first. So
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Now
That's
we're
that's
getting
the point zero, right? That's not the real first point. So I'll get it right. Kube first. Okay.
Kube first.
Kube first. GitOps.
GitOps.
Why are people so hung up on thinking that everything I've got is in my Git repository, therefore I am doing GitOps? And that's where they stop.
Yeah, it's a sneaky term like that. They are probably 90% of the time incorrect, unless they have been proactively working on specifically FlexCD, Argo CD, maybe one of the other variants, but really it's those two. If you're not working with those two tools, you're likely not doing GitOps. I know there's some open GitOps folks that would disagree with that statement, but generally speaking, GitOps is a new way of managing the assets that you want in Kubernetes, the way that I want to describe Kubernetes GitOps. I can't stop talking about how incredibly impactful the GitOps discipline is to Kubernetes organizations. In fact, we were building Kube first for about 10 months before we discovered true GitOps, and we threw everything that we were working on away, even though we were working nights and weekends and for free. And we had made a lot of traction once we discovered the promise of what GitOps brings to the Kubernetes table. It was a no-brainer to throw it away and re-architect from the ground up on GitOps. So very strong proponent of the craft.
The problem of GitOps, I mean, it's not a problem. The good thing about GitOps that ends up being a problem at the same time is that it's extremely simple from the user perspective, right? It's simple, very simple in terms that, okay, I put something in Git, and then that something becomes a real something in my Kubernetes cluster or somewhere else, right? Most of the people see those two parts, right? It's in Git, and then automatically it's somewhere else. And if that's what you see, then it's very easy to think, okay, so for example, if I trigger a pipeline, let's say GitHub Actions, that after I push something to Git, that will deploy something somewhere else, right? I'm doing GitOps. It's a very logical conclusion, right? And you need to enter deeper into it to realize whether that's the case or no. And you mentioned Open GitOps or whatever is the initiative, right? That clearly states there are 4 things that need to happen for that to be GitOps. It needs to be pulled, not pushed. GitHub Actions already out. Kind of that one thing already kind of disqualifies it, right? And then there are a couple of others like declarative and whatever the others are, right? But if you just observe somebody using GitOps, it's very easy to think that almost everything we ever did was always GitOps, right? Maybe unless you were in SVN, and then it's SVN ops, right?
You're absolutely right. And I run into that misconception all the time, given the product that I'm trying to advocate for. You know, I'd walk into company after company and they have DevOps engineers that swear they're doing GitOps. They're just doing it without Argo CD or Flex CD, and they have some Jenkins pipelines and. And the reality is that there's some fundamental operational capabilities that you get with GitOps that you will easily be able to understand if you're doing GitOps or not. Like, for example, you hired some intern, they hopped into your cloud and deleted your production cluster. What is your game plan? If your game plan is to go to your CI tool and start rebuilding stuff, then you are not doing GitOps. You're just not. And it's really that scenario. Well, that scenario, the disaster recovery scenario, and the portability scenario also of being able to create an exact replica of that cluster in a different cloud, or an exact replica of that cluster and all of its configurations, but running on your local host. That level of portability is just not possible if CI is your first-class citizen of delivery to your Kubernetes cluster. If instead you have a single point-in-time statement of across all of your infrastructure and all your applications in that infrastructure, this is what is running, and they're all self-sustainingly able to recreate themselves in that state using nothing but a GitOps tool, then you hold the trophy and you are number one in the GitOps world. and you have accomplished something that is, a little bit challenging to do to get to a point where you can rebuild from the ground up a complete production cluster. But that's where we've gotten to with the kube-first platform, is that you can literally run a kube-first install and delete your Kubernetes cluster in your cloud. And through Crossplane, you'll get your cluster back. And then through the continuation of GitOps, it will unfurl through the sync waves of orders of operations of what has to be delivered first, then second, then third, then fourth, through your suite of all of the applications that were intended to be in that cluster, and everything's back. And that requires you to continue that discipline into your apps that you're delivering to dev stage prod. And you have to think about it in those terms when you're thinking through database migrations, when you're thinking through the different clusters that you have in a production environment and what your delivery methodologies need to be for that to remain true. But as a foundation, kube-first starts you out on that foundation that like you can delete your cluster and it'll come back, and all the applications that are in it will come back in the correct order, work themselves out in terms of order of, because there's all these chicken and egg scenarios when you start GitOps bootstrapping your Kubernetes cluster as well. And it's terribly challenging. And it requires a lot of organizations that aren't doing GitOps to create these gross run lists where they have to, just kind of go through the sequence of all the things that they have to remember to do and what the order is to do them in. And that is counter to where we are if you have bought in completely to a GitOps paradigm. So it's an enormous promise that like I've been in IT for decades now, and I've been in the DevOps angle of testing and data and development and security and cloud engineering and platform engineering and development. And this GitOps ecosystem that we have on top of Kubernetes is what I have been searching for my entire career and working toward my entire career. So to be at a spot where Kubernetes combined with yet another very well-established and well-known technology that's also very well distributed like Git, and marrying the two of them together with these powerful engines like Argo CD has is just like, it is a sight to behold when you're really deep in the weeds and understand how these pieces fit together. It is just exceptionally forward-thinking.
You mentioned one word, and because of that one word, I will send you my bank information later. You owe me a therapy session. That
What's the word?
2 words: sync waves.
Sync waves. Oh, I heard your talk on sync waves, Victor. That was an interesting take. You had the kube-first team all kinds of riled up over Argo CD being. I believe you phrased it as. How did you say it? You said it's some inflammatory phrase like it is not Kubernetes native or something like that. The way that it works with the sync waves, and that the way the circuit breaking paradigm like stops it from eventually being correct was a really interesting angle that you pitched not too long ago.
Yeah, because realistically, the example you gave, okay, so the cluster disappears and then everything will automatically come back. I think that that's an amazing goal that is actually very, very hard, right? And this is not me blaming Argo CD. We can find those same problems elsewhere. So it's not Argo CD fault. I might have sounded I'm attacking Argo CD. I'm just trying to think a bit differently. But destroy a cluster and things might not come up as we expect them. I'm not saying that they will not, but it's not that easy. It's not literally just kind of like, okay, here's 750 applications stored in Git, go, right? It requires certain organization, let's say.
It does. Yeah. And there is an art to it. And you're right that if you're building your first platform on GitOps today, you're not going to achieve deletable production Kubernetes clusters in that first half a year unless you're using something to accelerate that journey. It takes a lot to decide what the order of operations are for your technologies. All of those technologies have interdependencies among each other, particularly when you're talking about that management cluster. Most organizations have some kind of a Kubernetes cluster that serves as their control plane, their management ecosystem. They'll put their IAC tools in there. They'll put their security tools in there. It's just kind of your central hub for how you want to run your infra and your application delivery to that infra. That management cluster is, generally speaking, the one that is the hardest to get to a point where you could delete that cluster and have it come back, because there's all these interdependent, you want to have a secrets manager, for example. You want all of your secrets to be in a single source of truth. Maybe you want to go cloud native with that secrets manager and go with something like HashiCorp Vault like we did. If you're going to do that, Vault, in our opinion, should run in your management cluster. So how are you going to do that from a practice standpoint? Your tasks are to create a Kubernetes cluster and then helm install Vault to that Kubernetes cluster. But can you create a Kubernetes cluster without any secrets? The answer is probably not. You're going to need a couple secrets. If you're using managed Kubernetes, you're going to have some secrets to gain access to your cloud so that you can create that EKS or whatever cluster. So those secrets have to start somewhere, and you don't have Vault yet. So where do they go? That's a tiny little microcosm example, but they're everywhere, because as soon as you have a secrets manager, you're going to need external secrets operator. An external secrets operator is perhaps going to be responsible for delivering Vault secrets to become Kubernetes secrets so that you can natively consume them in your cloud native applications. And so those apps can't be delivered until after you have both Vault and the external secrets operator operational. But maybe you needed some of those, like, I don't know, Ingress Nginx. Maybe Ingress Nginx needs to be there first, and then you need to reconfigure it later on to take advantage of some of the stuff that you have later on in that provisioning. So it is a complex topic, building and shaking out these interdependencies of applications, but it is also very real that you can define in a GitOps-centric way what the orchestration interdependencies are, and then how to shake out the chicken and egg scenario so that you install something one way before you have your final state that it needs, and then you lay over different configuration on top of that same application so it can take advantage of your OIDC clients, or so that it can take advantage of your secrets engine or whatever it might be that you have a little bit further on in the bootstrapping process. So all really neat stuff, all stuff that's sort of central to the product that we're building. It's why we built Kube first, is because building all that stuff takes so long to do. And so it takes a lot of just practice on the GitOps discipline to learn what works well, and that, having a Kubernetes job as part of that orchestration that undoes something that you did the wrong way when you were first installing, because now you want to install the right way now that you have a Vault secrets engine or whatever your scenario might be. It's all great stuff, though. And to be as far along as we are from a operational provisioning standpoint is just truly has me more passionate about the IT field than I ever have been in my career. It's so exciting to finally be able to have a single Git repo that has it all, and that you can recreate it and ship it around. I could take a Git repo, Victor, and email it to you, and you could host it in your own GitHub or GitLab, and you could have the identical cluster to the one that I just tore down. And that level of portability, when we're talking about hundreds of microservice applications, is really, really impressive. So it's got us all kinds of fired up about GitOps. We love Argo CD and the power that it brings. But sync waves, Victor, I think is a critical piece for Argo CD, if I can say so.
Oh no, it's critical. It's unavoidable. It's critical. I use it all the time, but I deserve the right to not only love things that I use, but also hate some of them, right? It's a necessary evil, right? What can you do, right? And again, Argo CD is my favorite tool, so I'm definitely not advocating for something else. Just that, the things you like, you think to be, at least I tend to be more critical towards things I like than things I dislike.
I will look forward to your first criticisms of Kube first then.
I'll hold you to that.
Careful what you wish for, right?
Exactly. But, everything you said I feel that those things were not possible in the past, mostly because we didn't have Kubernetes. And when I say we didn't have Kubernetes, I don't mean because of the, that you can create your custom resource definitions or that you have drift detection, reconciliation. As a matter of fact, I would even go as far as to claim that the first GitOps tool that wasn't called GitOps would be Chef and Puppet. They were actually pretty much based on the same principles. We were using it, at least in my case, with SVN. But still, it was pulling stuff, doing stuff, pretty much the same. What is different, and what I'm not very familiar with KubeFirst, but what I reckon that you're doing, right? That was not possible before, simply because we did not, as industry, agree on what is the base platform on top of which we will do things, right? In the past, it would have to be, I don't know, I'm inventing now tools, right? Terraform, its own world. Jenkins, its own world. This of that, it's kind of, you had a bunch of completely separate worlds that were connected through witchcraft and sorcery, right? Kind of every one of them had their own API. Some of them didn't have APIs. Sometimes you move files. Sometimes you do this or that, right? Now we finally have a system where we say, I don't care. If it's designed to run on top of that system, meaning Kubernetes, it will work with everything else. And that never happened before in the industry, right? You could never combine the tools in a way that we can do it now, meaning without witchcraft and sorcery, right?
Right. No, you're spot on. I spent a large part of my career watching trends come and go, and I thought Kubernetes was another one of those trends. When I was at USA Today, the last thing that I did at USA Today was argue against the use of Kubernetes. They had just gone through an enormous migration away from Windows and away from their on-premise infrastructure. And they were adopting Node.js, and they were adopting Linux, and they were adopting the AWS cloud. And we had just gone through this just enormous overhaul of their applications and how they deliver and how they run their infra. And in came the Kubernetes discussion right on script. And I swore that it was just going to be like everything else that had come and gone. And I was very aggressively saying that it wasn't the right decision to switch to Kubernetes. Of course, I left that company, and my very next company, my CTO was like, you're building our cloud and we're doing it on Kubernetes come hell or high water. So I had to learn it. And once I learned it, it became that your exact point became very transparent that suddenly there was a solution that got rid of the install guides. There was a solution that leveled the playing field, whether you were a Node app or a Python app or a Golang app or, any kind of containerized app, they're all equal. And you couldn't, even with Docker, you couldn't do that before. You couldn't go into an IT shop and say to them, hey, how are you hosting your applications in production? And have them say, oh, they're running on Docker on Ubuntu. And that's just the end of the story. That's not the end of the story. Like, how are you getting config into them? How are you getting secrets into them? How are you rolling out updates to them? How are you making sure that development and staging and production are architecturally similar? How are you allowing them to be different from a scaling standpoint, et cetera? And like all of those like tough things to talk about when you go from shop to shop, where it all feels very bespoke and it all feels like you've got just DevOps engineers and bash scripts that are just, writing bash scripty stuff. All of that disappeared with Kubernetes very swiftly. And then the GitOps evolution on top of that turned it into something that you could see in a directory structure in a very straightforward way. It's been fun to watch the journey, watch the evolution of what Kubernetes has done to the industry. But it's no surprise to me at all that it's taken over all the clouds. It's taken over our local hosts. It seems to have no ability to stop.
To me, it's no surprise now in retrospective, to be honest. It was very big surprise to me back in the day, I must admit here. I was the person advocating back in the days for Mesos because Mesos was built for scale. Mesos had a scheduler that did a really amazing job. I was advocating for Swarm because Swarm was user-friendly. A person could figure out Swarm in no time and be up and running, right? Kubernetes was so ridiculously bad. I'm talking about first days. But it was bad because back then I did not understand what it is. And what it is not an amazing scheduler. It's not an amazing user experience. It's a machine that enables other companies or other projects to extend it using a standardized user interface, interface, right? And that's what made it what it is today, right? Because you have other systems better in different ways than Kubernetes, but only one system that allows literally anybody. You can now, during overnight, extend Kubernetes with your custom something that will do whatever you want your users to do, right? If you know what you're doing. And you couldn't do that anywhere else. And if you could, then we would go into the stories similar to OpenStack. Yeah, you can do it any way you like. And that's what makes Kubernetes amazing. You cannot do it anywhere you like. That's the only really important thing in Kubernetes. You need to follow the pattern how to extend it, how to extend its API. Controller can be anything. I can have a controller that runs shell scripts. Kind of like there is nothing preventing me from doing that. And I'm pretty sure that there are some. But when it comes to how you're going to provide an interface to that something, then it's strict. Or at least strict to a point, right? And that's what is amazing.
Yeah, its ability to blossom with the ever-growing needs of the community and the CNCF projects that I have sort of unfurled over the course of the last decade, to see the fact that Kubernetes still, so it's my opinion that Kubernetes has not found its limit yet. I would love to know your opinion though, Victor. Do you still see Kubernetes as this limitless engine that can just extend and extend as far as the eye can see? Like you could dream up nothing that can't be solved with Kubernetes. Is that your mindset?
Yes, it is. But that's because I might be seeing Kubernetes in a different way than some people. Again, I'm pretty sure we will reach the point where containers will be replaced with something else. Might be Wasm or whatever else will come, right? We will see different schedulers in Kubernetes as well, right? What will outlive them all, that's the API. The ability to have a standard API, right? So something that infrastructure as code tools were dreaming of that always. Hey, can you guys, Googles of the world and AWSs of the world, you do your stuff, but can you somehow standardize? Can we understand what this is instead of everybody doing their own thing? Kubernetes API will live for a long, long time. Now, what is below that can rotate easily. And we see that if we look at the evolution of Kubernetes, it's pretty clear that it's moving towards the direction that there are less and less things in Kubernetes, right? Networking was baked into Kubernetes. Now it's not there anymore. It's CNI. You need to install CNI. You have CNI API. We know how it works. Implementation can be anything, right? And that ability to replace any part of it, almost any part, right? Some things were difficult. I know it took years to actually replace hard-coded Docker into any container runtime, right? Runtime interface and what's not. But we are almost there, right? Kind of everything is replaceable. So yeah, it will live simply because if you fast forward a couple of years, if you exclude the API, one might see, okay, this I never saw this, right? If I teleport you 5 years in the future, you look at the Kubernetes cluster, you might say, I don't know what this is. There are no pods. There are no deployments, or now we're using something called Z. I don't know, whatever, right? That can easily happen.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The evolution of Kubernetes to hand the controls to the micro product has been interesting to watch unfold. And you're exactly right. As Kubernetes continues to evolve, there's a consolidation of what we need because of the maturity of the Kubernetes engine. The operator implementation that kind of extended Kubernetes beyond just a thing to run apps and allow it to become a thing to run whatever you need run was certainly an evolution that I was ill prepared for when I started learning how Kubernetes worked. You read the objects that are in play. You have a deployment, you have a ingress, you have a service, you have a whatever you have, secrets, config maps. And you kind of build this model of, okay, well, this is a thing that allows you to run applications. That's great. I have applications that I need to run. I'll run those applications in Kubernetes. And then you go back to your laptop and you start running Terraform commands from your command line in your terminal. And it's like, well, with the evolution of Kubernetes allowing that extensibility, now you have tools like Crossplane coming in. You have tools like Atlantis coming in, and they can run your IAC for you. And they can provide extra layers of governance that you're not able to get when you're allowing all your cloud and developer engineers access to your cloud and able to run Terraform commands from their laptops. When you compare that to a sort of well-governed system running in Kubernetes that is only bound to your GitOps engine, and it's hard to imagine where Kubernetes will be in 5 years, but it's easy to understand that it won't be where it is today. It's also hard for me to understand what the limit will be for Kubernetes. I keep trying to find that ceiling. I've been struggling to find it for almost a decade now.
It is, in a way, contradictory at the same time. I feel that we are, right now, while we're talking, right, I think that two different things are happening, right? On one hand, finding new limits, let's say WASM, right? That will become a thing in a couple of years. But also we have actually consolidation happening. Within the areas that existed for a long time, we are getting winners in a way. And I'm using loosely those winners terms in terms of, okay, so we've been dealing with networking in Kubernetes for 10 years, something like that. It's Cilium. I'm not saying 100%, but kind of it's clear. Okay. And when that happens, when we finally find a winner in some area, we can truly move on. Okay, so we are not really discussing that anymore, right? The Cilium is going to continue advancing and stuff like that, but we're not all gathering and trying to find 57 different ways to implement CNI, right? Networking. We have this, we can move on, right? It's very hard to move on while the things the things that you left behind are still undecided, right? That's almost like in real life. Until I make this decision, I cannot move truly on because I'm still going to be coming back to it. And when I look at Kube first, right, kind of like, I feel that I'm looking at the tools that you chose there, and I feel that the decisions you made would have been, not all, some are still unknown, but would be much harder to make, let's say, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, right? Now it's pretty clear. Oh, secrets, open secrets operator, right? Kind of, no need to discuss, right? Kind of like, that's it. We know what it is. Move on. GitOps, it's Argo CD, maybe Flux. That's it, right? Kind of like, move on. Nobody talks about Carvel anymore, Cup Controller or whatever else is there, right? There was Ranch or something, Fleet, right? That's a sign of maturity in a way. That does not mean that we are not moving to different areas, but okay, this is mature now. It's almost like a good sign that you have less choice in a way.
I do agree with that. Yeah, it would be hard for me to imagine a scenario where I'm looking for a replacement for CertManager. CertManager does the job. It does it well. The entire internet that is using Kubernetes understands largely how it works, how you use it, how you annotate your services to leverage it. And it's very simple. Great. Let's let Kubernetes be boring in that area, right? And I think it was Kelsey Hightower that may have said that first. Kubernetes getting boring is a good thing. And every time there's a tech that is a no-brainer, Ingress, I think, is still kind of up in the air a little bit. You've got, certainly with API Gateway evolving the way that it has.
But it's becoming irrelevant, right? Because now we don't, when I was defining ingresses, I had to know 57 different annotations that I need to put that are very specific to this ingress or that ingress. Now with Gateway API, I don't care. Put anything you want. Why do I care what's inside? I'm still defining Gateway API interface.
Right. No, it's a really good point.
But the reason why I don't think that Kubernetes is mature enough yet is that we still did not move from the place. And I think that we were in a very, very long place in the past and still are, thinking that Kubernetes will be adopted by everyone. I don't mean literally everyone, but masses. And I think that Kubernetes in the current state cannot be adopted by significant number of people because it's still, we don't have those user-friendly layers on top yet. I will consider Kubernetes really mature when it becomes equivalent of, when it mutates from, in the past we were working with hypervisors, now we work with EC2s. When that happens, and when I don't see I don't remember last time I saw a hypervisor. And that's the place I want to get with Kubernetes, that people do not know that it exists. I mean, when I say people, there will be people who are, that's the job. Kind of like, I manage Kubernetes clusters. I know it inside out. I don't mean for them, for everybody else. When I see a Node.js developer and saying, I just deployed my application where? I don't know. I don't know. Why would I know?
That's an interesting take. There could be a world where in a Kubernetes environment, the developer doesn't know about certain details of the Kubernetes infrastructure that they're delivering to because of all the benefits that they can have as long as they're using Kubernetes, right? Like, for example, like a developer instance of a backend application, right? That's a challenge that is just always going to exist. And it's not Kubernetes' fault that it's a complex infrastructure challenge to be able to establish a clone of an environment and change one instance of one backend app to be a different flavor for a particular developer. But that's a tough challenge, just like in software development. And Kubernetes softens that challenge quite a bit because you can take that development folder in GitOps and copy it, paste it, name the new one Dave, and all of a sudden that's Dave's environment, right? And Dave can have his own instance of his backend app in the Dave namespace of that Kubernetes cluster. But he still needs to know that there's a namespace there. He still needs to know that he's in that dev cluster.
I mean, I'm not saying not know anything, but I go in a very opposite extreme that I spent years focused on Kubernetes. And I still have parts that I don't truly understand, right? I cannot expect a Node.js developer who that person is not going to spend years learning Kubernetes. And we put on pause everything until Joe learns Kubernetes, then he can deliver his front-end application, right? And then he will learn that, okay, so something is wrong, right? What's happening? Oh, there is a deployment. Deployment creates a replica set. Replica set creates pods, and there are containers in those pods. But actually, it's not really fault in the pod because it's in a service, but it's not a service because we have a service mesh, and so on and so forth. It's madness. It's a good madness because it's a base without which we could not even dream accomplishing unless you're Google or something like that, what we have today. But it reminds me on early Linux days when we were compiling our kernels. And that was so awesome. But I couldn't expect everybody to compile a kernel. Right? We got distributions, and you can be using Ubuntu right now without knowing that there is such a thing as a kernel. And that's the base of everything in Linux. You don't have to know it to use it. I mean, I use Mac. I don't know what's behind that there.
It's a really good point.
It's a challenge. I'm not saying that, I can snap my fingers and we get there. But that must be the end goal somehow.
I hear you. It's so difficult to accomplish, though, because of the optionality, right? The optionality is a two-edged sword. It gives you the opportunity to have exactly what you need for the problem that you're trying to solve. But it also necessarily makes you distinctly different than that other company just right across the street that's using all the same technology, all the same Kubernetes, all the same cloud, but they have a different service mesh, right? It produces a different signature.
true in a way, but that, and I'm going down the rabbit hole now. Darren is
I
going to
know,
go
I'm right there
crazy.
with you. You should come over for dinner.
But I think that the part that is helping is what we were talking about today, earlier, about certain choices are being made. We know it's gateway API. I mean, it will be soon, right? And I don't care what's behind, right? We know it's going to be Cilium right now. How many... I mean, I don't know the numbers, but vast majority of CNI implementations today are Cilium, right? We know it's OpenTelemetry. The problem of assembling that picture that I completely recognize that we might never get to is that there are so many variations that we might have, right? But we are now getting to the place where we are getting winners. Maybe not the best choice for 100% of the cases, but certain choices are becoming clear.
I do agree. It's the foundation of the product that I'm working on, right? Is I'll hand you a whole bunch of winners. Maybe you'll stick with 95% of them. Maybe you'll stick with 60% of them, maybe 100%. And you just have no work to do except build your apps. But let's get the winners. In that sense, it almost turns KubeFirst into like a Kubernetes, I don't know what to call it. It's like a distribution, except it's not as handcuffed to being a distribution because you're allowed to change it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It feels, I mean, again, I haven't used it, but judging from the description stuff, it feels like it is equivalent of a distribution on top of a kernel, right? There are certain choices there that personally I would consider still shaky. Argo CD, yes. ESO, yes. Helm, I'm not sure. It's the most commonly used, but one way how I look at it is that I tend to follow projects a lot. I enjoy pain, so I try things that nobody should try, right? One way you can look at it is by measuring how many new projects in certain area came within last year, right? So if I look at GitOps area, nothing really. It's Argo CD Flux, kind of like that's very clear. It's a very clear choice. Maybe not unary, maybe binary, but still a very clear choice. Now, if you look at, for example, the ways to generate YAML, I mean, just in the last half a year, I heard about and I tried Pickle, Q is becoming a thing, KCL is becoming a thing. I'm not now saying that they're better or worse than Helm, but the fact that so much influx we have in some area means that, okay, so this might not be yet solved. And then when there is no influx, it's either nobody cares or, okay, this is good. This is good. Solved. Checked.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to watch the evolution unfold that way. You get these opportunities in my shoes to just kind of drop in on companies in the middle of their cloud native adoption process. And it's fascinating to see, and it might be a little bit of effect, influence, and cause, but the folks that are engaging with our project have largely already agreed that those technologies that are on our list, and it's not because we're geniuses, we're just going to the CNCF surveys and seeing what all the enterprises are using. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if the enterprises want to use it, the enterprises have the money. So if the enterprises are going to pay for cloud native engineers to work for them, then cloud native engineers need to have skills in the tech that the enterprises require. So the cloud native engineers, whether they're working at an enterprise yet or not, if they're trying to gain experience in the technologies that are valuable to enterprises, they too are going to be proposing those same technologies to their smaller SMBs. And the reality is that sometimes that's not a good idea. For example, service mesh. I should ask for your honest opinion, Victor, on service mesh. Should service mesh be in every single cluster? I don't know that I have an answer to that.
I have two answers. One that I was giving, let's say, a couple of years ago, and one that I'm giving now a couple of years ago. I would say service mesh comes later when you have a need for it. Don't complicate your life with service mesh from the start, because you need to have specific needs for a service mesh, right? I don't know, like doing canary deployments. Okay, if you're doing canary deployments, I know you can do it through Ingress, but then that might be a good, but you're not starting your Kubernetes journey with canary deployments. Come on. Now, that was a couple of years ago. today is, okay, you're going to choose a CNI. You're likely going to choose Cilium for a CNI, right? Cilium does not have all the features that other service meshes do have, but it has likely enough for what you need. So you're already having, I feel that right now somebody using Cilium, which is a significant number of Kubernetes clusters, you need to find the thing that you don't have to justify service mesh, because Cilium is going up with the feature set, right? Then you already have it in your cluster.
There's classes of tech. There's certain tech in your Kubernetes cluster that is probably going to be in every single Kubernetes cluster. Maybe you'll have a Kubernetes cluster someday in some weird circumstance that just doesn't have ever any need for an ingress. Okay, sure. Those exist, but they're rare.
You wouldn't have to not have people accessing that cluster as users.
Right.
For that to
Right.
happen.
Yeah, it would have to be for a completely back-end ecosystem, right? Secrets management is a big piece. It's an upfront need, but you can offload that burden to your cloud if you're in one of the big three, and a lot of folks do. You could use AWS's SSM parameter store and still use external secrets operator to pull your secrets. You're just not pulling it from something cloud native. You're pulling it from your cloud instead.
Yeah, you might not need Vault, but you will almost certainly need ESO.
Yeah, exactly. And so defining what those pillars of a cloud native platform are is an interest of mine. There's clearly an aspect of infrastructure as code first, because you have to have that cloud and cluster. There's an aspect of secrets management, because a lot of your applications are going to need them. There's an aspect of user access and IAM, who's allowed access to that cluster, who's allowed access to that cloud. That's a pillar of your platform. There's application delivery, building your containers and Helm charts. That's a whole different section of your Kubernetes platform. With service mesh, and you could even throw things like policy as code into the mix, there are other disciplines that are valuable. And it seems like the larger an organization you are, the more valuable that component becomes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for a single small business that only has one cloud native engineer working on everything for the whole company. That doesn't necessarily mean, yeah, let's put the burden of a service mesh on them on day one and make them do policy as code while they're at it. Your platform will evolve as your needs evolve and as the skills on your team are able to accommodate those needs. It would be great to be able to define what all those categories are. And I think the platform working group is trying to establish like a platform maturity model that's pretty close to establishing that as like a foundation. I've been working with Abby Bangser, did a lot of great work trying to establish like a maturity model is such a gross word, but it's very appropriate for this use case. It's exactly what we need. It's one of the rare times that a maturity model is super valuable. Maybe it's only valuable to Kubernetes crazy people like you and I, Victor, but I don't think so. I think we all need that lexicon and that language of what are the parts of the platform, being able to assess how mature you are at that discipline, and what you should be striving to do based on the needs of your organization, you know?
Well, here's one thing that I do know. We are destined to be producing YAML for the rest of our working lives.
Amen. Can we get a witness?
You were correct, Darin, without probably wanting to be correct.
I was very careful in how I said those words.
You were said producing, not writing.
Correct.
Correct.
That was
I agree.
That was on
100%.
purpose. Yes, producing, not writing. KubeFirst can be found at kubefirst.io. John, thanks for being with us today. Anything else you'd like to say as we close out?
Darren, no, it was a pleasure chatting with you guys. And I guess for anyone that was interested in KubeFirst or cloud native adoption, we have a single command line. You can brew install it. You just run either a launch up command to get to the user interface, or you can run a create command in any of our 7 or 8 clouds that we support. We have a Slack community. So if you run into any problems and you don't like GitHub issues, you can just hop on in and be like, I had a bad time. And we got a whole team and a whole community of cloud native engineers that are ready to help you out. So I hope that you'll consider joining. That's available at kubefirst.io/Slack if you wanted to join our community.
Again, all of the information for John and KubeFirst will be down in the episode description. John, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, guys.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.